Let's talk about it here. So these are guys we just don't want any part of. We're done. We're kind of moving on. Nate, you and I are going to disagree on the first one because I'm kind of in on them.
Oof.
But tell me who you're avoiding to start off.
Yeah, I'm avoiding Marquise Brown. And this
Mm,
is tough because I've liked Marquise Brown for most of his career when he was on the Ravens, when he's been in the Cardinals. He's been pretty productive, pretty good value for most of his career. But right now, it's not looking great for Marquise Brown. Wide receiver competition likely incoming in this offseason, whether it's through the draft, most likely through the draft, I believe, but it could also be a free agent as they're going to surround Kyler Murray with more talent. Michael Wilson's been a little bit of a fun breakout this year. See what he's been doing. Greg Dortch always pops up every now and then. We talked about him on one of the last podcasts.
waiver wire gold, Greg Dortch.
But the big thing is Trey McBride has really broken out this year, and he's been honestly like a top 15 wide receiver since getting the full snaps as a starter for the Cardinals. So his breakout has been he's the number one target now for the Cardinals. Marquise Brown has not looked very good this year, career low yards per route run, obviously affected by the quarterback play at the beginning of the year. But over the last 2 games, Mike, 0 points. I started Marquise Brown this week in one of my playoff lineups, and it got me 0 points.
That's rough.
Yeah, so I'm going to be avoiding him in 2024. I think he's just fallen down the totem pole yet. They haven't put him onto a contract extension yet. I do think that will happen.
I think so.
They invested the first-round pick. I expect them to put the money into him. He can be a very good wide receiver, too, for that team. But I think they're going to be looking maybe somewhere else to bring in to add to that wide receiver room. So right now, if I can sell him for a late first, if you can still get late first value for Marquise Brown, which I think is going to be difficult, but maybe you still get some brand name there, I would love to make that trade. But otherwise, I would move Marquise Brown for 2 seconds. Okay. I think that's a deal you might be able to make. It's kind of tough right now, though, with coming off 2 0-point games.
Yeah.
But some players I'd rather have, Christian Kirk, Jahan Dotson, valued around the same as Marquise Brown right now. At tight end, I think you're going to like this, Mike. I would move Marquise Brown for Jake Ferguson, Pat Freiermuth, really solidify my tight end room if I need something like that.
Yeah. I see on Keep Trade Cut, he's also valued very closely to Terry McLaurin. Which way would you lean there between those two?
If Jacoby Brissett's playing, definitely Terry McLaurin. He was killing at the end of the game last week. But Terry McLaurin, I would still lean because he's just been the more productive wide receiver. I know you get a couple years younger with Marquise Brown, but as much as I love Dotson, McLaurin's definitely holding his own over there. So
you're only really getting like less than 2 years younger with Hollywood Brown. So
yeah, not too much.
It's apples and oranges. Look, I like Hollywood. I'm kind of in on him. I've talked about him on past pods, but the values that you're giving me, I would move him for those players and those values gladly. Nate, I'm ready for you to disagree with me.
All right.
Because I'm avoiding Diontae Johnson.
Sad.
I know, but this is where we're
at. You don't like fantasy points. That's fine.
We have to score some in order for me to get you some. Here's the problem. It's not the player, it's the value. We don't hate players at Dynasty Realm. We hate values. And we've been chasing his 2021 season since that happened. Production has dipped every year since then. Matt Canada gets fired. It's going to get better, right? No, because then Kenny Pickett gets hurt, and it went from worse to worse. It's just one of those things where right now I think the only pass catcher I really want from the Pittsburgh Steelers is Pat Freiermuth. We're going to have to draft a lot of these guys. I'm just not willing to pay that value. Nate, floor is yours to go ahead and disagree with me.
I'm not avoiding him because obviously I have a lot of them already. But I do want to point out that over the last 4 weeks, Mike, Diontae Johnson has 3 touchdowns, 15 receptions for 202 yards. He's the wide receiver 19 over the last 4 weeks.
I'm avoiding. I just feel like the hype is not matching up with what his production should be. Thought it'd be a lot better. Maybe it'll be better next year. I don't know. But I'm avoiding Diontae Johnson. Yeah, Kenny Pickett.
Your boy.
Hey, look, there's still hope for Kenny Pickett. It's dwindling. Nate, would you like to move on to the next player that you're avoiding?
I would love to. I think I've talked about this player and avoiding him multiple times already on this channel, but let's just really drive it home one last time going into the end of the season. So Tony Pollard, look, I'm going to list it out again.
Yeah.
He's a free agent after this year. He's on the franchise tag. They have no long-term commitment to him. He has not looked nearly as explosive this year. Career low yards per carry, career low yards after after contact per attempt. That's such a hard stat for me to say. Bob knows what I'm talking about. So look, he's had a solid season overall. Like, he's been a decent fantasy running back because he's just continued to play. He hasn't really missed any games. He's unfortunately not really found the end zone very often, but he's been getting volume, so he's been decent for fantasy in what is a landscape of the running back position that's devoid of consistency. Tony Pollard's actually been a bright spot this year, but it's going to be 27 going into next season. He's a free agent. I don't know if he's back with the Cowboys or if he's somewhere else. And if he's somewhere else, Mike, what I've seen is if you're a free agent running back, there's not a lot of hope for you.
Yeah.
Number one, good luck getting paid and getting any kind of investment, which, we want to talk about the numbers and, how good players have been in the past, but NFL teams, when looking at the running back position, is what can you do for me this year? What can you do for me next year? They don't care about what you've done anymore. They don't pay players based on their history anymore. So at least not running backs.
No.
So I'm moving off of Tony Pollard right now. 2 seconds if I can get it. Can I get an early second and a third? That is plenty for me to move off of Tony Pollard.
Yeah.
Move off an aging asset like that has a lot of question marks going into next year. Let me re-roll the dice, especially in the early second. I think I can upgrade from Tony Pollard pretty easily in the early second of this draft. Some players I'd rather have: Brian Robinson, Jaden Reed, 2 young players that I would love to, cash in Tony Pollard for. Even Josh Downs, who I think his value has gone down over the past couple of weeks because he hasn't scored as many fantasy points, but we still know Josh Downs is a very good wide receiver and going to be, one of the top wide receivers in the Colts. So another guy I'd probably target as well.
I like this. Definitely fine with moving him for the picks. Love the Brian Robinson pick, and I'm going to be all on board with getting Jaden Reed, of course.
Of course.
I have no problems with that.
It's time to reset the clock with Tony Pollard. Go find somebody else a little bit younger and, with some kind of potential, because I think Tony Pollard's just moving down from here.
Let's get into the next player that I am avoiding, and that is Green Bay Packers wide receiver Christian Watson. Never been a big Christian Watson fan. We knew he was raw coming out of North Dakota State. Had a quarterback change, and Nate, the worst thing that you could have as an NFL player, lots and lots of soft tissue injuries.
That's tough stuff there.
Yeah, it's just one of those things. This hamstrings predominantly for Christian Watson. For the value that you're paying, I'm going to look elsewhere. And he has an extremely high ceiling, but the problem is we've seen what his floor is. And we've talked before, if I could move him for Jaden Reed, I would gladly do that. I like Jaden Reed better personally. I would try, his value kind of lines up with that of a 25 first. I'll take that. 25 isn't that far away. You know what I mean? And maybe you could make some moves, get that 25 first. That could help you get back into the first round this upcoming year. I will even go older and take Mike Evans. Mike Evans, unlikely to be back with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Free agent wide receivers and free agent running backs, huge difference.
Very different.
Very different. Devontae Adams still putting up respectable numbers with the Raiders, even with Aiden O'Connell. Nate, agree, disagree? What do you think here?
I liked Christian Watson before he gained as much value as he did. And I thought he's been rather overvalued for a while because I think the inconsistency is what really worries me. And then you add in the injuries on top of that. And, someone I'm mostly staying away from myself, especially when you've seen his value fluctuate over just the past year with the injuries, with the production. And I think when you can sell high with Christian Watson, you should sell highs. I don't mind going after Mike Evans, going after Stephon Diggs, because those are top wide receivers that are going to help you win championships over the next 2 or 3 years.
And Nate, you just traded for this guy from me, but now you're avoiding him. But hey, look, this is how it goes. Things can happen fast, even in Dynasty. Nate, who are you avoiding?
Mike, the Ravens running back position is cursed.
It really is.
I wouldn't wish it upon my worst enemy to be the running back for the Ravens because they're bound to tear their ACL. And unfortunately, Keaton Mitchell did it. I haven't heard the full report yet, but looking at the picture of it happening, it looks like he probably tore a lot more than just the ACL as well, which does not lend to a speedy recovery. No. And with it being a late season injury, at this point, I don't really expect him back in any significant way next season. If he does come back, it's going to, we saw J.K. Dobbins really struggle to come back, and he had an injury where it was more than just his ACL. That makes such a huge difference. If it's just your ACL, you're recovering from one thing. But once it becomes 3 or 4 things, that just makes your recovery so much harder. Now you're working with multiple things that are weakened and having to recover. I don't think that Keaton Mitchell is going to give me any kind of production that is significant to my team until 2025. And at that point, that being a year and a half away from now, I'm going to move on. I'm going to avoid. I'm going to go after players that can help me in the meantime, can gain value in the meantime. If I want Keaton Mitchell, I can go get him later. I'm not worried about if I have to acquire Keaton Mitchell later. If you really like Keaton Mitchell, you can go acquire him basically, 9 months from now for probably a 4th-round pick. 6 months from now for a 4th-round pick.
He might be sitting on waiver wires.
Yeah,
at some point.
Right now, you might be able to move him for a 3rd-round pick. You might be able to move him for a guy like Chase Brown, for a guy like Zach Moss. And I know Zach Moss isn't the sexiest name out there, but Zach Moss has really shown out this year. He's a free agent running back. And I know I don't like free agent running backs, but I don't mind free agent running backs that no one really values. Yeah. Because Zach Moss is probably going to get paid to play a role somewhere. And when you can just kind of pick him up for pretty cheap, and then we saw, hey, if you can have any running back that's going to have production this year, he's valuable. Zach Moss is probably going to be that again next year. He's going to be one of those guys that sticks around and gives you fantasy points year in and year out. Maybe it's a little inconsistently, but you'll know when you can start him.
If you could move Keaton Mitchell for a guy who could be a spot starter for you, especially late in the season, look, Jonathan Taylor's out. If you had Jonathan Taylor, you were relying on him. Now you're putting Zach Moss in, you're feeling comfortable about it. It's a good thing. I would honestly, if I have the room on a taxi squad or whatever, and he's just stashed, I'm okay with holding on to him, seeing what happens. If not, I'll move him for a 3rd. If someone's going to give me a 3rd, I'm going to take it. If they're like, I'll give you 2 4ths because I want to stash the guy, deal.
I'll take that too, because at least I can do something with those 4ths. Maybe I can make something out of it. With Keaton Mitchell, he's not gaining any value anytime soon, and he's just unfortunately being a roster clogger for the next year and a half, probably.
All right, so let's move on. And I'm avoiding Rhamondre Stevenson. Maybe I'm bitter. Rhamondre Stevenson, he hasn't been awful, but he also hasn't lived up to what we hoped he would be, or where we were drafting him, or how we were acquiring him this past offseason. It has been a disappointment. I think the New England Patriots as a whole have been a disappointment this year. I think we could all agree on that. We benefit from a quarterback and coaching change. These are both speculative at this point. We don't know how it's going to go. We've heard rumors, but it's December. The rumor mill is swirling. New coach comes in. Does he try to save Mac Jones? I don't know. Does Bill Belichick go, get me a good quarterback, and they move on from Mac Jones? What happens then if a different offensive coordinator comes in? I don't know. So look, I'm going to move him. I'm going to try for a 1st. If I could get 2 seconds right now for Rhamondre, I would strongly consider it. I would also rather have Brian Robinson Jr. We like him. What are your thoughts on this one here?
Yeah, I avoided Rhamondre Stevenson for like the first couple years of his career, and then I bought into him this offseason. I was like, you know what, Rhamondre, you finally convinced me. I'm going to buy in. I bought into Rhamondre Stevenson in a couple different leagues this offseason, and unfortunately it hasn't worked out for me. But so I'm going back to my old ways. I'm avoiding Rhamondre Stevenson again. I'm right here with you, Mike.